Without warning or mercy, the sky lit up as drones unleashed a devastating strike. Over 1,000 rebels were wiped out in a single night. The Arbinda tunnel turned into a ghostly, smoke-choked war zone after 3 drones, supported by ground forces, completed their mission. But how did Burkina Faso, once dismissed as too weak to defend itself, manage to pull off one of the most effective ambushes in Sahel history? Let's break it down. The war didn't begin when the drones took off, or when the Cobra units took position, or even when the first shot was fired. It started much earlier, quietly and out of sight. It was a different kind of war, one that didn't make headlines or TV reports. It happened in the shadows, where victory depended more on information than on firepower. This effort had been building for months. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who had just secured his leadership, made one thing clear: Burkina Faso wasn't going to sit around waiting for foreign help. Foreign military bases were told to leave, and offers of international aid came with too many strings attached. What the country needed now wasn't money or speeches, it was information. In a land where rebel attacks could happen anywhere, and fighters often looked like regular people, intelligence became the most important weapon. So, Traoré turned to the people themselves, the overlooked but powerful eyes and ears of the nation. He didn't rely on elite analysts or outside experts. Instead, he counted on farmers, villagers, the displaced, the injured, those who saw the rise of violence from their doorsteps. This was the beginning of what some now call the Whisper War. In the northern regions, networks of everyday informants were built up again and strengthened. But these weren't typical spies. They were women who quietly tracked how many motorcycles passed through their villages. They were shepherds who memorized new rebel routes. Children learned to spot unusual behavior or unfamiliar accents. Each piece of information, no matter how small, added to a clearer picture, one that satellites from other nations couldn't see. To make sense of all this, Burkina Faso created small tactical teams trained to respond quickly and flexibly. These teams used real-time data, not reports delayed by red tape or distant decision-makers. But raw data wasn't enough. The military needed foresight, something it had always lacked, to strike before attacks even began. So, Traoré changed the rules. He introduced a new type of command system, one that previous leaders had never tried. Instead of letting departments act separately, he brought them together. Intelligence from local citizens was matched with high-tech drone surveillance. Military planners worked side by side with civilian volunteers known as the VDP, or Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland. Together, they formed a network that was part high-tech and part human insight. It wasn't the typical way wars are fought today, but in this case, it worked, and it changed everything. This growing network of informants and surveillance started to uncover a serious threat. Over several weeks, a clear pattern emerged. A convoy of militants was quietly making its way through the Arbinda corridor, slowly moving fighters and supplies. But this wasn't just a group on a mission. It was a moving army, preparing for something big. And they were acting like no one could see them. They were too confident. After all, Burkina Faso had failed to detect such movements in the past, so why should this time be any different? But this time, it was different. What they didn't know was that small drones, some no larger than birds, had already been watching them from above. Some of these drones hovered high, nearly invisible against the bright sky, following the convoy for hours. Others flew ahead to scout and confirm possible ambush locations. These weren't just any drones. Thanks to local expertise and new international partnerships beyond traditional Western allies, Burkina Faso engineers had upgraded them with better cameras and longer range. Meanwhile, back on the ground, snipers were being trained to hit from newly chosen high-impact zones. VDP militia groups dug hidden shelters near narrow passages in the landscape. Helicopter crews practiced flying and striking at night. But the most important order given to everyone was this: wait. Patience was the most dangerous part of the plan. For nearly 2 months, the convoy's movements were tracked, analyzed, and mapped out. The goal wasn't to hit them at any random moment. It was to hit them so hard and so precisely that they couldn't recover. When the convoy finally reached the final stretch of the Arbinda corridor, the battlefield was already set. The militants didn't suspect a thing. Even foreign intelligence experts had no clue what was coming. But for Burkina Faso's forces, this moment had been carefully prepared. Captain Traoré had been waiting to strike, using intelligence as the fuel for what was about to unfold. The next chapter of this story is all about how that strike happened, how drones lit up the sky, and ground forces closed in like thunder. But first, let's see what happened when the convoy finally walked into the trap. By the time they arrived, the insurgents thought they were just following the usual routine. They had used the corridor before to steal, move, and regroup. Packed into cargo trucks, motorcycles, and pickup trucks fitted with weapons, the hundreds of fighters had no idea they were stepping into a setup. But this wasn't ordinary ground anymore. Every detail of the land had been studied, from the curve of the roads to the lines of trees. The area had been mapped with precision. And long before the convoy arrived, all exits had been cut off. The first hit made no sound. A drone, silently circling high in the air, launched a guided missile directly into the front vehicle, a heavily armed pickup. It was a clean, targeted strike. Not just to cause damage, but to take out the convoy's lead and throw them into confusion. And it worked. The rest of the vehicles slammed on their brakes and tried to reverse in panic. Within seconds, a second drone struck the last truck, sealing off the rear. The convoy was now stuck. But this wasn't a random air attack. It was a carefully timed destruction. The drones moved around in coordinated paths, changing altitude and direction, not just bombing targets, but pushing the fighters towards specific locations. On the ground, Cobra commandos had already taken up positions at key bottlenecks. Now, as the rebels scrambled to figure out what was happening, they were funneled straight into the hands of those waiting troops. The troops on the ground didn't rush to open fire. They waited patiently, watching as the rebels' confusion slowly turned into fear. Then came the signal, not a loud noise or a radio command, but something quiet. The third drone dimmed its lights and hovered silently over the middle of the convoy. That was the go-ahead. Hidden in the trees, snipers took aim and fired, picking off key targets: radio men, scouts, and leaders. These weren't random shots. After weeks of watching and studying the enemy, each target had been identified and memorized. As the convoy's leadership collapsed, chaos spread. That's when the full-scale attack began. From the east, special BIR forces moved in quickly. At the same time, Cobra commandos advanced from the north. Helicopters roared in from a nearby base, lighting up the night with flares and laying down heavy fire to keep the rebels pinned. This wasn't just about destroying the enemy, it was about shattering their confidence. Every action, every light, every sound was carefully planned to throw them off balance and make them feel hunted. What really made this mission different, though, was who was fighting alongside the trained soldiers, ordinary citizens. These were the Homeland Defense Volunteers. They weren't lifelong warriors. They were regular people, farmers, shopkeepers, and mechanics who had stepped up when the war came to their doorsteps. They trained quickly, but fought with incredible skill and intensity. Even the elite units beside them were surprised by their courage and accuracy. Their pain drove them. Many had lost homes, families, or entire communities to the insurgents. Under Captain Traoré's new leadership, these civilians weren't treated as side support anymore. They were now part of the front line. And when some rebels tried to escape into the forest, they ran into deadly traps, tripwires, and hidden bombs had already been placed to block every exit. The operation lasted about 6 hours, but calling it a simple battle doesn't do it justice. It was a perfectly organized takedown. By sunrise, smoke still hung in the air. More than 1,000 rebels had been killed. Some were captured and would later be used to gather valuable information. A few managed to crawl away, wounded. No civilian areas were touched. No innocent lives were lost. But perhaps the strongest message came after the fight ended. There was no cheering, no looting. The soldiers packed up calmly and left. Drones returned not to strike again, but to confirm the job was done. Soon after, the code word that marked the mission's success was quietly shared. The news didn't spread through official statements or media. It passed from person to person through phone calls, shared videos, and whispers. People told each other what had happened. This wasn't just a military win. It meant something deeper. Something long broken had finally been put to rest. But how did Burkina Faso reach this point? Where did this new strength come from? And how did drones, usually seen as high-tech toys for rich countries, become the deadliest weapon in its arsenal? Let's take a closer look. As the last gunshots faded in the Arbinda corridor, one truth became clear. The real turning point hadn't come from the ground, it had come from above. The 3 drones weren't just tools, they were symbols of a new kind of warfare. They didn't appear overnight either. Captain Traoré had realized something most regional leaders had missed. War had changed. In this new kind of conflict, the enemy didn't roll through in tanks or form large groups. They hid among villagers, moved quickly, and disappeared into the landscape. Beating them would take more than courage, it required constant eyes in the sky. So Traoré made a quiet but powerful decision. He invested in air power, something rebels couldn't dodge or deceive. Unlike flashy arms deals used to impress foreign allies, this drone program grew quietly, behind the scenes, with one focus: results. These weren't leftover drones sent from Western storage rooms. They weren't charity from NATO partners. No, these machines came from elsewhere. They were the product of different alliances, offering advanced technology with fewer political strings attached, alliances the West might not approve of. But Traoré didn't stop at buying drones. He brought in young engineers through online forums and private networks. Many had studied abroad and returned with sharp skills. He gave them a mission: turn these drones into the brain and eyes of Burkina Faso's defense. No middlemen, no bureaucracy, just action. And the result? A fleet of drones tailored for the country's own war, not someone else's. Built with purpose, powered by local intelligence, and guided by a new strategy, they became Burkina Faso's sharpest edge in the fight. Some of the drones were built for long flights, using thermal cameras to track human movement over tough landscapes for hours at a time. Others were fast, sharp, and deadly, able to find a target and destroy it in under 8 seconds. But one of the most impressive developments was the use of micro-drones. These tiny flying machines could hover silently near enemy camps or slip under thick trees, sending live video back to command centers deep inside the country. And it wasn't just about the drones themselves. Training was just as important. It wasn't limited to drone pilots. Entire field units were taught how to work with aerial data. Soldiers on the ground learned to think like drone operators. They were trained to move based on what they saw from the sky. They waited for visual confirmation before taking action. Even their helmets were upgraded with laser-guided sights, to match the precision of aerial input. Volunteers from the VDP, who were once scattered and poorly equipped, received simple drone tools that helped them identify, tag, and track enemies while on patrol. Suddenly, the war zone became unified. Victory was no longer just about firepower, it was about awareness. To the rebels, it felt like ambushes came out of nowhere. Camps were hit just hours after being built. Supply convoys were taken out before enemy scouts even sent warnings. Confused chatter filled the insurgent radios. Some spoke of ghost-like enemies, unseen fighters, even betrayal from within. But it wasn't magic. It was math, software, and a decision to make drones more than just machines. They became partners in combat. Even more surprising was how fast this transformation happened. Within months of Traoré pushing the drone initiative, Burkina Faso's military reached what experts call fourth-generation coordination, a level of real-time teamwork between air support, ground troops, and intelligence units that many wealthier armies still struggle to master. Tough, experienced fighters suddenly found themselves overwhelmed, taken down by a nation once dismissed as powerless. And the changes didn't stop at the battlefield. This shift redefined leadership in Burkina Faso. Now, it wasn't about fancy speeches or wearing a uniform, it was about vision. Traoré began to be seen not just as a president, but as a builder of systems, someone who believed true independence included control over technology and information, not just land. His drone program sent a message to the world. We're not following your old playbook, we're writing our own. Still, as clips of the Arbinda ambush spread online and global media covered Burkina Faso's stunning precision, one question grew louder for the citizens, for the rebels, and for international forces watching closely. What was Traoré really trying to say? Success feels powerful. It unites a country, inspires hope, and quiets critics. But it also brings something more dangerous: expectations. The Arbinda operation wasn't just a military win, it changed the story of Burkina Faso. In one night, the country went from being seen as a victim to being viewed as a force to watch. Traoré had thrown a huge stone into the still waters of Sahel politics, and the ripples went far. But now that the dust has settled, the real challenge becomes clear. What happens next? The size and precision of the ambush raised the standard not just for the enemies, but for Burkina Faso's own people. Traoré has shown what the nation can do when it stops depending on outsiders and takes full control. But that achievement comes with a price. From here on, anything less might be seen as falling short. That's the cost of success. From now on, when new attacks or setbacks happen, the people won't ask if the army is capable, they'll ask why it didn't act. The real test won't be another ambush. It will be whether this momentum can last. Because even a successful operation like Arbinda comes at a high cost. Not just in weapons and gear, but in coordination, planning, and above all, intelligence. The surveillance system has to keep running day and night. The network of informants must be protected. Drones need constant maintenance fuel, repairs, software updates. Troops will need rest, retraining, and perhaps most importantly, a sense of trust that their leaders won't abandon them once the headlines fade. Adrenaline and patriotism alone can't keep a system running. Even the most motivated fighters eventually feel the weight of stress, exhaustion, and the non-stop pace of high-tech warfare. No matter how brave they are, volunteers are still human. The advantage fades quickly when fatigue sets in or communication lines break down. Meanwhile, the enemy isn't standing still. Militant groups, although weakened, are still active. After a major operation like this, they usually change tactics, splitting into smaller groups, hiding deeper, and using new paths. Some might even cross into neighboring countries, which could drag Burkina Faso into disputes with states that don't have the same level of security or resolve. As the country shows strength on the battlefield, it also risks drawing in threats it didn't expect. Then there's the political reality. Captain Traoré's bold and unapologetic leadership style depends on momentum. But personality alone won't secure a country. Real independence means building strong institutions, fixing basic infrastructure, and most importantly, giving people a reason to believe peace is worth it. Without lasting stability, even security can feel meaningless. A nation where people lack jobs, clean water, good schools, and fair justice will always be fragile. Traoré understands this. He's already begun testing development programs led by the military soldiers helping build roads, grow food, and reopen village markets. But the shift from emergency defense to long-term governance isn't simple. It's slow, difficult, and full of both political risks and physical dangers. Internationally, the ambush also made things more complicated. The world took notice, but not everyone who's watching is friendly. Countries that once looked down on Burkina Faso are now watching with mixed curiosity and concern. How did a nation under sanctions pull off such a detailed and deadly mission? Who helped them? And more importantly, will others try to copy Traoré's approach? These questions hint at deeper changes ahead. Burkina Faso is no longer just seen as a country waiting for help or instructions. It has become an example, a symbol of what's possible when a nation takes charge of its own security. But with that visibility comes risk. It could attract both enemy attacks and outside interference. Some would argue the real challenge is just beginning. Fighting rebels and pushing out foreign armies is only part of becoming truly independent. The real task is building a system that can survive success. A system that doesn't relax in calm times, doesn't fall apart under pressure, and never loses sight of its purpose. Yes, Traoré's drones cleared the way. Yes, his troops destroyed a major threat. But his biggest challenge now is more quiet, more complex. It's the fight to last, the fight to stay legitimate. It's the mission to make sure that Burkina Faso is not just free today, but strong, stable, and unstoppable tomorrow. And this time, the battlefield is the country itself. Do you think other nations should follow in Traoré's footsteps? Could they pull it off? Let us know in the comments. Are you ready to see Africa take charge of its own defense? Want more stories like this? If so, hit the bell icon and subscribe to our channel. We're here to bring you stories no one else talks about. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.